Hello, Facebookers. It's Steve Barrett here, Editorial Director of PR Week. Delighted to be doing the weekly podcast this week with my old pal, my old Twitter sparring partner, David Brain. How you doing, David?
Very well, Steve. Very well, thank you.
Looking forward to this interview. You've flown all the way from New Zealand just to do this podcast, and I really appreciate that.
This
and we got Frank Washcut here, our regular co-host. How you doing, Frank?
I'm doing well, but I'm just taking it all in this week as you guys fight it out.
Well, we're newly friendly now. You know, in our football teams, we've come to terms with it all, and etc. etc. David's a Manchester City fan. For those who don't know, I'm a Manchester United supporter. Both failed in Europe this year, but anyway, that's enough of that nonsense. We're going to get on with this show. If you've got any comments, please leave them on the stream or questions for David. And be nice. It is social media. We should have taken that advice ourselves a few years ago, but
yeah.
We're going to get going with the show very shortly. Hello and welcome to the PR Week, PR Week's regular weekly roundup of everything that matters in the worlds of PR and communications. My name's Steve Barrett. I'm the Editorial Director of PR Week US. Going to guide you gently through the next 25, 30 minutes. Depends on how good our guest is. Well, we've got a good one this week, folks. It's David Brain, PR legend, co-founder of Stickybeak, who's flown all the way from New Zealand to do the PR Week podcast. David, how are you?
I'm tired, Stephen. I'm
tired?
Yeah.
After that intro?
Even after that intro. Lovely intro, thank you.
Yeah, PR legend indeed. You had a long and storied career at Burson Master, Weber Shandwick, Edelman, and now you're doing your Stickybeak thing, which we'll find out a lot more about. Sounds interesting. And we got Frank Washcut here, our co-host. How are you, Frank?
I'm doing well, but I didn't quite get the intro that David did.
Well, you're on every week, you know.
Just a little jealous.
Familiarity breeds contempt.
So we're going to talk to David, and then we've got lots to chat about in terms of stories this week. We're not all off to Cannes. Myself and David are. Yeah, Frank's not. We're going to Cannes. Why does it matter? Good question. We'll find out. WPP's Mark Reed, he says CMOs are becoming more like CCOs, and I suspect he didn't mean that in a flattering way. We'll find out what David thinks of that. Drew McCaskill, he's exited Nielsen. He's going to do a startup, which is what David's done, so they have some good advice for him. Kraft salad frosting. That was an interesting one, wasn't it? Should brands sugarcoat the truth?
That's right.
Did you see what I did there? Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yes. I'm here all week, mate. I'm here all week. Frank Mergenthaler, a senior guy at IPG. He's going to leave the holding company. So what does that mean? And who's going to move up in his place? We'll chat all about our fantastic new conference. It's PR Decoded Purpose Principles, going to be in Chicago in the middle of October. And our Purpose Awards, which we're launching. Great new initiative, very excited about that. And I like Breaker, actually. There's an LGBTQ agency network just launched, Multicultural and Agency Network. We'll find out about that. But David, let's start with you. Tell us about this new Stickybeak thing, and what is it, and why the name? How did you come up with that?
Stickybeak is a new way of doing quant research. We felt that the way in which you currently do quant research is broken. You're probably aware that most of the omnibus and quantifiable research you do uses panels and bureaus where you have sort of battery hen type conditions for people who have agreed to fill in questionnaire after questionnaire. And there's a
like
debate.
Nielsen? Would that be
Well, a little like Nielsen, yeah. Basically, most of the companies tend to use the same suppliers and providers. Some have got their own sort of tethered bureaus and panels. But what we decided to do was to use social media. So for each questionnaire that that a client does, and it's a SaaS business, so you don't need to go to an agency. It's the other benefit of this. You put your questions.
SaaS is
software as a service. Thank you. First bit of jargon. Stop me there. You put in the parameters of who you want to ask that question. We serve up a little piece of creative on Facebook or Instagram. Recruit people in. They either get a chance to go in a lucky dip, or we're just finishing the contracting with Oxfam. They can donate $2 to Oxfam, and then they fill in the questionnaire. And what that means is we've essentially got a panel of 3 billion. The net effect of that is we can do nationally representative. We're doing that in 4 markets initially, US, UK, Australia and New Zealand. But the real benefit is where you've got those niches to go for. So, for example, we've just done for a client, a nutraceutical food supplement client in New Zealand who wanted to target women who had toddlers, babies under 2 years old. Obviously, food supplements are a big part of preparing your body for breastfeeding and the rigors of early motherhood, and that's a very difficult group to get to. But because the Facebook universe is so large, we were able to target them, bring them in, turn around a questionnaire in about 36 hours for about a quarter of what it would have cost one of the panel or bureau providers. That's how it works.
Interesting stuff. So why is it called Stickybeak? Am I missing something?
No, you're not. So when we were looking for a name, so BMF, the agency that's part of Enero,
and you're also a sort of non-exec director of that?
I'm a non-exec director of that. They have
We'll talk about that as well.
They have a mantra which is a little bit of bad makes it better. What they mean by that is like a little bit of grit in the oyster in any brand or creative proposition that they came up with. So we thought that Stickybeak, we were really on behalf of people being a bit nosy. And the phrase that came to me as a Brit was nosy Parker. One of those people, I've kind of got a nosy Parker who's going to be nosy on my behalf.
Journalists, a good trait for a journalist.
Absolutely, very good trait. Well, then journalists are Stickybeaks, because Stickybeak is the antipodean equivalent of that. And it's a bit of a busybody, it's a bit annoying, so there's a bit of bad in it, which I guess we might come to on the Kraft thing, because I thought it might be a name that sort of stuck.
Has a journalist ever annoyed you, David?
Good Lord, man.
Has a PR Week journalist ever annoyed you? Never. That would never happen.
We'll have to try a little harder.
So do you have to have a name like Survey Monkey? That's a research.
There's a lot of simian branding going on.
Simian?
Well,
Good
simian.
word,
There's MailChimp and Survey Monkey and so we've gone on the Stickybeak route. So please give it a try.
Yeah, what's that research company we had on the podcast, Frank? The name is totally escaping me, doing some interesting stuff.
Well, that was Morning Consult.
Morning Consult, yeah.
And they have a good product too. I mean, and the way that they deliver it, is really interesting as well. But it's a bit of a different competitive set, more politics.
Yeah, and the way that they're pitching it as a quicker turnaround, cheaper, more responsive, and frankly more realistic.
Well, I think for agencies now, obviously we think we do a cool thing. I'm sure they do. But for agencies now, you've really got to keep abreast, I think, to be able to deliver a proper service to clients of the stack of software and technology vendors that are out there that make your job easier and make your job more effective on behalf of your clients. I mean, in some senses, PR has become a bit of a PR companies are sort of software,
more scientific.
Yeah, they're technology and software vendors and integrators for clients. And any agency that doesn't have a good idea of what its stack of products and services, from the basics of Google Analytics to the new forms of research like ours and others, is really missing a trick.
That's a good point. Do you think that's changed the profession and the type of skills you need as you come in? You traditionally would come from a arts background, writing, but now you need to be a bit more tech focused, don't you?
I think you do, and I think what you're seeing in a lot of the agencies is that initially, again, like a lot of these skills are, they're kind of ghettoized. So you have your person who's in charge of the new technologies, and they're usually young and geeky, and they can do a bit of programming, and they might do a little bit of dashboard work themselves. But increasingly, as the new generation of people come through who are much more proficient at this and have been using a lot of these technologies when they were in further education and kind of like it as well, they see it as part of the job. And so, it really gives companies a competitive edge. And I think as well, it levels the playing field a bit, because you no longer have to be a global giant with the resources to be able to deploy on having these people and getting the best deals. These are, as SaaS word, services as software as a service products are, dollars a month. And if you know how to use them, you can get some incredible data analytics and output help.
Good stuff. And there's an event this evening in New York to launch that, and you'll be in Cannes next week as well, although more on the Enero front. Yes, indeed. Now, as I said, you're a PR legend, been in the business a few years. When you started out with Tim Sutton, was it?
Yes.
And a young man called Danny Rogers used to work for you, didn't he? He's the PR Week UK editor. Were you all young and geeky back in those halcyon days?
Well, I don't think technology had been invented, to be frank. Yeah, so Danny
How was Danny as a PR pro?
Danny Rogers was a really good PR pro, and I'm just trying to think. He will remember this. We worked on some dreadful computing services company called Computer Center. I hope they're not around and heard that anymore. And no, he came in at account exec level. I saw him sort of grow up within the business, and then
he went the other way. Most people go into PR from journalism, and he went the other way.
Most people like yourself and me, I started in journalism. We become, poacher to gamekeeper. He went the other way.
Yeah. Interesting times. I can just imagine you guys out and about in London doing your thing. Was this the 80s? Or?
It was the 80s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great times indeed. And then you went on to work for Weber. What company was that? Was that
That was an agency called Paragon, which then turned into Golan Harris.
Right.
It was, if you look deep into the DNA of Golan Harris, Paragon is there somewhere.
But yeah, like I said, you were at Weber, you were at Burson, and most famously at Edelman. You still got your little blue Edelman book here, your notebook. Does Richard know about that?
No, and look, having changed jobs as often as I have, my top tip for anybody out there doing it is before you leave, make a big visit to the stationery cupboard. So I am still getting by on Edelman.
Yeah, so you were APAC MEA CEO. You were on the main board of DJE. What's your reflections on your time at Edelman and how the industry's changed in that time and what's happened since you left? How long ago did you leave?
I left 2 years ago.
2 years.
2 years. It's
Okay.
almost 2 years. Yeah, 2 years. Look, it was Edelman was the job of my career. You've mentioned, a number of others, and I tended to skip about a bit, but I did 13, 14 years at Edelman, 6 years running Europe, 7 running Asia. And the story of Edelman during that time is legion, and you guys have covered it well. But I think what was fantastic about it was Richard's vision in those days for, I guess that sometimes in our industry there are sort of what I sort of call elevator opportunities, where you see something coming and you get on it early enough that it kind of lifts the whole business. And Richard was smart enough to see a number of those. Social media, you'll remember in the early days of social media, Richard indexed and invested in that way more heavily than anybody else. And then on the back of social, we went into digital. We were making digital agency acquisitions before anybody else, which was not easy, and not all of them worked. But what that meant was we were able then to go from expand the capability of PR from PR to social through to digital. More latterly, on the back of that, when we discovered that with brands, with the way in which media was fragmenting and coming apart, and some of the brands were beginning to distrust the traditional media approach of the creative agencies, and all of a sudden we had some capabilities in the media channels, social, digital, that they liked and respected. We were recruiting planners and creatives for the first time, and as you know, the famous stat is Edelman now has
500 or
600 of them, and really does, and that was fantastic to be part of that, because that was a whole new model, and that gave us another sort of elevator, if you like, and drove us onwards.
Where do you think they're at now? Because they just had their first year in a decade when they didn't grow. That must have been because you left, I would imagine. Is that true?
No, not at all. Why are they? I don't really know. And it was slowing whilst I was there. So maybe I put the handbrake on before I left. Look, I think any company that gets to the size that Edelman does, it's 900 and something million. Change becomes more difficult, not because you're not committed to it anymore, but there are more people that you have to change along the way. If you're bigger, then the legacy parts of the business are bigger, and where we could change those in the past through the force of personality and might, if you like, you need to make structural decisions, and you need to work in a process way that takes time to learn, and I think Edelman is going through that at the moment. That said, the agency has more than any other defined the industry. I still think, it's the only brand that people outside of PR know and have heard of.
It's true.
Richard still does a fantastic job for us as an industry at venues like Davos and all over the world. He's the only CEO in our world that's probably known, just as Martin Sorrell.
Well, you could say since Sorrell left, actually there's no one in the ad industry doing that either, is there?
That's a good point, actually. That's a very good point. I mean, Sorrell was indefatigable in his pushing of the marketing services industry, and I don't think he got a lot of credit for that.
No,
everybody liked to call him a bean counter and talk about the things that he didn't do, or the crushing of creative spirit and will and all of that, and some of that was true. And I did experience some of that. I was in a creative agency that got bought by Martin Sorrell, but he was the one who was making brand investment and advertising important at a board level to CEOs around the world when they would have much easier, much happier compartmentalized it down with a CMO.
I agree with you. John Rand, Michael Roth, the others don't see that as part of their role.
No, Maurice Levy.
Mark Reed doesn't. Maurice Levy did a little bit, but I think they should be advocating for their industry. And we need that as an
We
industry,
need our champions,
yeah,
and
for sure.
Richard does a fantastic job with that, still does.
Yeah, lots to get through actually. So let's get into some of these topics because I want to hear what you've got to say about those as well. Yeah, it's good to see you back with a new venture and doing your work with the NRO as well. Interesting holding company there. We'll come on to that a bit later. Frank, let's talk about Cannes.
Yes.
Why does it matter? I mean, we're all heading.
That's
a lot
a
of
great
people are
question,
heading
isn't
off
it?
there. Everyone thinks we're all there for a jolly and just partying all week, which of course we're not. We're all there working hard, aren't we, David?
I plan to be, for sure.
Yes, indeed. But it divides opinion, doesn't it?
Sure, it really does. Now it's kicking off this weekend and running through next week. And of course, last year was when they split it into the new tracks to sort of invigorate it after Publicis sat out a year. So it's going to be interesting to see, number one, I think, how the PR firms fare this year. And do they really have that breakthrough year that they've been anticipating for a couple of years? Or is it still going to be the advertising agencies winning the real bulk of the awards, even in the PR category?
Yeah, David, there's always a lot of navel gazing about that, isn't there? Because in the PR lines, it's usually ad firms that do well. Ironically, PR firms have actually started to do really well in the other categories, but they don't often win in the PR lines. But the PR firms still seem a little bit enthralled to Cannes. They're all going to be there. They're invested. Last year's chair, Stuart Smith, another person you will know from the old days. He was the jury chair, and he said PR needs to invest more.
He was right.
Cam was really pleased to hear, but we seem to have a problem getting PR firms winning the PR awards.
We do. There's a slight irony in this, I think, because if you look at the creative awards and the integrated awards and even some of the digital awards, actually PR thinking has won at Cannes, because there isn't a campaign these days that doesn't talk about social movement and earned media either as a bolt-on or as part of the very thinking of it. So that's got to be good news.
So everyone's doing it. The ad firms, the media firms, the digital firms.
Right. I mean, and so the earn-centric approach to creativity has taken off with the creative agencies. So, I said NRO and BMF is part of NRO, and they're a creative agency, and they certainly have that thinking, and it's not just bolt-on earned thinking, it's in the creative brief. I'm to a BBDO agency in Auckland, a very storied winning agency. There's about 230, 240 people in there, and when I was given the walk round by the CEO, he pointed to what was 20 people who were doing the task formerly known as PR, but it was part of the integrated thing. So I think for the PR agencies, we've got a challenge in the sense that we saw, certainly at Edelman, we saw the brand area as an opportunity, that earn-centric thinking was coming in, and we were the masters of that. And then if we could only get a bit of this upstream planning and creativity sorted, we'd sort of march in. To an extent, that's happened. But what's also happened is the ad agencies who we sort of lambasted for being, addicted to the 30-second TV and old-fashioned in their ways were far from that. And they weren't sitting down, and they have changed their creative product. And you see that year after year in the awards. And, they definitely have advantages in the fact they've got bigger budgets and they have people who are dedicated purely to doing those wonderful videos that tell the story. But with some notable exceptions, we still fail to plan and ideate, use that horrible word, create, have big enough ideas that get cut through a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And what was it, like 3 years ago, that PSA was the one that ran away?
Dumb Ways to Die. That's an Australian campaign.
They ran away with all of the awards.
McCann Erickson.
Yeah.
But it's pure PR thinking, isn't it?
Well, that's a great point. So the world has come to earned media, but PR people don't have a monopoly on earned media. So where does that leave the PR industry? Because it's still 9% of budgets. CCO budgets are not going up. PR firms are fighting for marketing budgets. Is this a problem for PR if everyone else is doing it?
It depends on what section of PR you're in. I mean, lots of people out there who do corporate and public affairs and probably,
High margin stuff.
not interested in any of this. But if you're at an agency that's broadly based, the fact is that CMOs control fees, not just total spend, but fees that are 14 to 20x the CCOs spend. So the opportunity for our industry there is huge and vast.
Yeah, no, interesting stuff. Last point, Frank, interesting activations by Philip Morris at Cannes this year.
Yes, we're waiting to see that. And that's, it's interesting because the market is shifting, obviously. But there are organizations that are calling them out for it and, not too pleased that this is going to be happening as part of the good track. That's, good with a capital G, a formal track at Cannes. And, but, for those companies, for the Philip Morrises of the world, the ground is shifting, and a lot of them are investing in the smokeless tobacco, e-cigarette companies, stuff like that. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that this week.
What's your take on that, David? Because Edelman had a strong policy they would never take a tobacco client. They're on the main stage with Wycliffe John, Bon and Bo doing a session, and they're on the good stage, which has got a few raised eyebrows at a tobacco company, even though they're promoting themselves as a smoke-free company now, which I don't know how that works, but what's your take on that? You're coming from a company that would never take Philip Morris as a client,
No.
Cannes has got Philip Morris on the good track on their program.
Yeah. I'm not sure where the science resides currently on vaping as gateway to other things or sort of medical effect of it, but I know that Richard's view would be that it's in the same category and he wouldn't take a bar of it. So I probably haven't thought that one through fully, but
it's a head scratcher, isn't it?
It is.
We did a piece the other week where we asked the big agencies, would you take them as would you take vaping companies as clients, and most of them said no.
Yeah, and Richard was adamant about
Weber and Edelman definitely said no. But the Wall Street Journal takes Philip Morris's money. Cannes takes Philip Morris's money. Other media owners take Philip Morris's money. We've been offered money by them. It's a problem. Media companies need the revenues. So
it is. I mean, look, I think it's for every agency to decide. I mean, the other thing that Richard did, cost me in the part of his business I was running was coal. Mm-hmm. We just won BHP Billiton in Australia, which just to do the corporate work, and there's still a coal miner, and so Richard had that fight as well. So yeah, it's a constant issue for agencies to work out where they stand ethically, and I think you've got to look internally at your employees and staff to help you sort of frame your views on that. And then if you're in an agency like Edelman or Weber or others, then you've got lots of health brands that would not want to work with an agency that's working up against tobacco.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot on the podcast and at PR Week, and we will again, I'm sure. Let's go talk about WPP, Frank. Mark Reed, the new CEO, took over from Martin Sorrell. He made a statement about CMOs, saying they're becoming more like CCOs.
Yeah, so Mark Reed's take on this, and it's not one that a lot of our readers will be thrilled to hear, is that chief marketing officers are now acting too much like chief communications officers, which is to say they are focused solely on communications and not on the bigger picture, product, pricing, all of those things that go into the traditional marketing. Sales. Yes. So that's interesting. He thinks they've become too focused on just communications.
What do you think of that, David? I mean, holding company chief bashes PR people, the first time that's happened, is it? But
no, in Bears and Woods category, I think we said earlier. But I think he misspoke actually. If you look underneath what he said, what I think was quite interesting, he set up that centre for, I can't remember, the Centre for Revenue Growth, sounds almost like an NGO. And I saw a stat that 40% of CEOs are involved in some form of digital transformation or disruption, or fighting off a disruption for their business. And then the CMOs below them are dealing with that digitization of their whole function, and then they're having to show that they are on the side of revenue. That didn't always used to be the case. We've got so much disruption and realignment of business processes going on in organizations that if you're a CMO and you end up in the old category of just dealing with brand issues on the top scale rather than hardcore marketing, which I think is what Mark Reed was talking about, then I think you've got a problem. So I think that was what he was focusing at, but it was a little pejorative.
Yeah, it was a little. What did you make of WPP as a competitor over the years? You would have gone up head to head with them. You worked with them at one point.
I did, and the constituent brands were fantastic. I mean, I think I was looking at the market prices before I got here, and they're basically priced at revenue, pretty much. So there's no multiple. There's no multiple there, and we were talking.
It's surprising no one's come in for them.
Well, yeah, and we all hear stories of TNS Cantor being hived off. But look, I can see that what Reed is beginning to try to do. He's got many brands there that overlap. He's trying to consolidate those. If you were being mean, you'd say he's moving the chairs on the deck. If you're being more generous, then he's making necessary rationalizations, and you've got to be able to do that to numbers game. To some extent, but he does talk passionately about the craft, which Martin found hard to do. He couldn't help but go back to talk about it in terms of business and financial terms. And from people I know who've worked with him, I think he's got a lot of support there. So it's a bellwether for our industry. I would dearly hope that he turns it around, makes sense of it, and and drives it on.
What about in the PR area? They merged Burson and Conan Wolf last year. They've got Helen Knowlton. It's a shadow of what it used to be. Ogilvy, who even knows whether they're a PR firm anymore? Whether they have a PR function. It's changed a lot, hasn't it? Helen Knowlton and Burson were the two biggest firms in the world. That's 25 years ago.
It's changed a lot, but hats off to Donna. I mean, she seems to have made incredible strides at that integration. And as you said, I worked at Burson.
Donna Imperato.
Yes, big love, Donna Imperato, and who I've never met, and I'm old enough that I've met most people in the industry, but if she can get, I think Conan Wolf was growing at something like 12% before they merge them, and if she can get that level, just some of that growth into the big, and it was Moribund, Burson, Marstella, that would be amazing. But you're right. I mean, the holding company's done no favors really to H&K and to Ogilvy. But then you switch holding companies. You look at IPG, and how come they have been able to inculcate Weber and Golin, two of the most vibrant, distinct, and successful PR companies. So
with some other niche players, well, not
correct,
niche, Carmichael Lynch,
correct.
and PMK, VNC, and various others as well. Yeah, and current marketing too. So, interesting stuff. The holding company space. Frank, Drew McCaskill, he's exited Nielsen. He's going to do a startup. Tell us all about that.
That's right. He's going to be an investor and culture analytics advisor at Culture Genesis, which is going to be a technology app maker, social media driven company for young, I don't want to say millennials, Gen Z, up and coming folks, the next generation.
Talking about millennials again, Frank.
We don't want that. No. So of course he was SVP of Global Comms and Multicultural Marketing at Nielsen. He's a 40 under 40 veteran. So familiar.
Great guy, Drew, and we wish him well in that. What would your one advice be for going off and doing a startup, David?
Steal office stationery.
Nice one. Yeah, good one. Let's talk about Kraft salad frosting, Frank. Salad frosting? What's that all about?
This is one of my favorite stories of the week. So, salad frosting is basically classic ranch dressing, but repackaged in a tube, sort of like cake frostings to help parents lie to their children about what they're actually eating. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? I don't know. But salad frosting is what they're calling it, which is kind of, the whole thing's funny to me because ranch dressing is awfully tasty to begin with. So if you have to package that, then...
Kids don't really like salad though, do they?
Well, the ranch dressing makes it better.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
We've got Sabrina and Jordan, our interns, in. Do you eat salad?
Yes. No.
Oh, one on each side there. Would Kraft salad frosting make you more or less likely to eat salad, Sabrina?
Less likely.
Less likely, okay. But the serious point of this, David, is how brands market themselves, isn't it? So should they sugarcoat the truth?
Well, I think there
Or
was
is it just a bit of fun?
there's a little of sanctimony
We're
in this.
taking-
There was that.
We like to be sanctimonious.
Not
don't we?
you.
We're journalists.
Not you. I was. Yeah.
Oh, I can do sanctimony.
Oh, you can. I know you can. I've been there. There was a wonderful insight there about white lies, the lies that parents tell children to get them to do things that are good for them. And we all do that. I mean, if there wasn't lying to children, there wouldn't be Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy, for heaven's sake.
Have you got a revelation for me on that front?
Oh,
then?
Lordy. Look, I mean, if it had been me running that camp, I love the idea. I just thought it was a clever idea, but you could have predicted some of the backlash that would come. So if it had been me, I would have tried to co-create that with a parenting group of some kind, and I would try to find ways in which other forms of helping your children do things they don't want to do but should do was part of the coaching for that. So they could have defrayed it. I don't know was it a PR agency or an ad agency that did that?
I'm not totally sure.
I suspect an ad agency because the other thinking wasn't in. But the idea itself was great, I think. And if you look online, overwhelmingly the people responding to that hashtag are going with a joke and finding other things. Broccoli, I tell my son that broccoli looks like a tree, and if he eats that, then he'll grow big and strong like a tree. Yeah. All of the other, and it's lovely, it's great content.
So it's almost growing organically into what you said, partly through social media.
Correct.
And the hashtag is lie like a parent.
Check it out. Interesting insights there. Yeah, more PR thinking could have been applied to that campaign, says David. I think I agree. Let's talk about another holding company, IPG, Frank Mergenthaler. Well, he's CFO over there, isn't he, Frank? He's retiring at the end of the year.
He is for now, and at the end of the year, he is retiring. He's going to be replaced by Ellen Johnson, who works for one of their media companies and also has a holding company-wide role. So he has a dual role. He is CFO of the whole holding company, but he is also the leader of their CMG group, which of course contains Weber Shandwick, Golan, and their CEOs have reported up to him. So it's going to be interesting to see who they appoint to be the next leader of that group and who the PR agency CEOs will report up to.
Yeah, interesting. Andy Polanski and the cast of thousands that are co-CEOs over at Golan will all report up to the new person. What do you make of that development, David? Is that going to open up opportunities for some of the senior PR pros over there?
You'd think, wouldn't you? I mean, it'd be interesting to see who goes into that CMG role.
Yeah, because Harris Diamond used to run that CMG, didn't he, when he was CEO of Weber?
That's right, and Harris is sort of in line and waiting, I imagine, to see what happens at the top job. But Frank, who I met a couple of times, and a numbers guy, but a wonderful numbers guy, and again, you look at the environment there and CMG that he created and the success of those firms, and they're PR firms as well. So I think we ought to sort of pat him on the back as an industry as he goes out, because we know how hard it is to create an environment in holding companies that PR firms succeed, and Frank was a big part of that.
Yeah. He, I think, is retiring, isn't he? But this phrase, retiring, seems to be used quite liberally these days when people leave companies, David. Did you retire from Edelman, or did you just leave?
No, I just left. As you pointed out, I live in New Zealand, and I was running a huge region that involved me getting on planes, long-haul flight planes, every other week. And I've still got a 14-year-old son, the family was young, and I've been doing that for 13, 14 years, and I just had
done with it.
Enough of it. So we managed that sort of exit and process, and I always wanted then to do something else. Living in New Zealand, there aren't any of the sort of big New York, London type jobs around. It's a small place, and that's why I ended up doing startups and advisory board stuff.
It is a small place, a beautiful place, and obviously you had a horrific incident earlier this year. But talk us through that, because David Tolbert, who's the co-founder of yours on Stickybeak, is kind of involved with Jacinta Ardern, the Prime Minister over there, who got great credits for the way she dealt with that tragedy.
She's remarkable. I mean, as for many people, they will probably one of the only two people they know from New Zealand, probably Lord now and Jacinda Ardern. Her rise to prominence before that terrible event was, almost as dramatic. She was the number 2 in the Labour Party campaign going into an election behind an incumbent that had won the previous 3 and had a popular leader. And the Labour Party, of which she was deputy leader, was performing badly, retired himself, and she had 7 weeks, turned that campaign around, and came from nowhere to, with a coalition partner, win it. And she has this remarkable ability to connect. She reads the room well, she can take a brief well, but more than that, she's got a gut feel for how people react to situations and issues, and she can assimilate a lot. I go back and I think of people like Blair and Clinton at their height. She's kind of got that about her. So, immediately after that event, and most of this now is public record, she had the confidence to go and sort of show emotion and show sympathy, to lead a country that wasn't used to grieving. I mean, I think for those of us in the US and UK, it's not like you become inured to these things, but you kind of do.
They happen quite regularly.
They do, and unfortunately we know that process we go through. Something terrible happens, you watch it on the news, you then try not to watch it on the news, you go through the anger and the grief that you sublimate onto these situations, and at some point you put it into another place. Well, you had a country, New Zealand, that had never been through that process. And what she was incredible at doing was sort of articulating how people felt at that time, as well as drawing that community in. And when you see the sort of divisive nature of politics in the UK and politicians here, perhaps it's a remarkable thing.
Yeah, she's a great communicator, really. Yeah, at the end of the day, isn't she? And she is very empathetic. So, and incredible the way she dealt with that. Let's quickly talk about this LGBTQ agency network, Frank, because we're running long on this. Breaking story, this.
Yeah, it is, and our senior reporter Thomas Moore wrote this one this morning. And what is happening?
Yours, David, isn't it?
That's even still breaking story.
So what it is 6 smaller agencies are coming together to sort of form a coalition, and they're arguing that the big agencies and the big holding companies don't do multicultural issues well, that they don't do LGBT issues well. And they believe that because their firms are more focused on these topics, that they can deliver better across the network. And 6 firms are Chino Chapa Communications, Much PR, Renew PR, Precise Communications, Mahogany Chan Communications, and Sociology Communications.
Easy for you to say.
Yes.
So, did this come out of that event last week at the PR Museum?
No, I don't think
has it been in the works
It's
for a
been
while?
in the works for a while.
Yeah.
It's been in the works since early last year, but that was a pretty remarkable event that the PR Museum held last week. But this has been in discussion since early 2018.
Yeah, we'll be interested to plot how that plays out. Let's finish on purpose. PR Week's conference this year, annual conference, is going back to Chicago. And it's all about purpose. It's called PR Decoded Purpose Principles, October 16th and 17th in Chicago. And we're launching some purpose awards on the evening of the first day of that. And that you'll find out more about that on Monday. But it's really caught in the imagination of everybody. And it seems, David, the subject of purpose, there's a lot of nonsense talked about it, frankly. And there's a lot of purpose washing going on. You mentioned Davos earlier. At Davos, if you would imagine every single company in the world had purpose at the center of their mission, the way people are talking, which we know is not the case. How important is that for companies and brands now? People want to know where they're coming from, don't they? They want to know what the brands stand for, and they want them to make statements. But that's not an easy thing to do, is it? Because it's not the core. Sometimes it might work for Nike, but Gillette tries it. What's your take on that?
My take, we've talked agencies a lot, but I think this is the big challenge for our colleagues in-house, frankly, that purpose isn't something you bolt on. It's not rocket science to say purpose actually has to be built into the way in which the company behaves and thinks and the actions and policies around that. And if you've got big organizations, and most of the time we're talking about purpose being brought into big organizations rather than startups and new ones, for which it's naturally there, that takes a lot of commitment, muscle, finance from the company to do that. So you need a particularly strong in-house PR person to articulate the long-term benefits for it and then write out some of the short-term costs and issues that they will affect on that company, because purpose hurts and slows companies down in the short term mostly before they get the medium and long-term benefits of it.
Yeah, that's very true, and it's not easy. So that's why the conference is existing, and that's why we're putting those awards together to highlight the best practice case studies and really get people together to talk about that and to learn from the mistakes. There've been some high-profile mistakes too, and we're not going to sugarcoat that. So yeah, do check that out, and more to come on the awards on Monday. David, been an absolute pleasure chatting to you,
Thank
and could chat for a long time actually, but which we maybe will later over a drink and in Cannes next week. But good luck with Stickybeak. We wish you well with that, and
Thank you.
Good to see you in New York again. So yeah, and thank you, Frank, as always. Hold the fort next week in my absence. I'm sure you'll be fine. In fact, things will probably run a lot more smoothly. Anyway, that's all we've got time for the PR week. We'll see you next time.